"I would like to file a formal complaint about the rain," the guest said, completely seriously, sliding a written grievance across the front desk. And he was, by a comfortable margin, the most reasonable person you are going to meet tonight. Because there is a certain kind of guest who walks into a hotel, hears the door lock behind them, and quietly stops performing the exhausting role of a normal adult. No neighbors who matter. No one left to impress. Just a locked room, a stranger at the desk, and the sudden, intoxicating freedom to behave exactly as the voice in their head has always wanted them to. The staff write it all down. In incident logs, they are absolutely not supposed to show anyone. And tonight, we are going to read them, moving from the merely eccentric to the genuinely unanchored. We will pass through 3 different kinds of strange. And the very last guest had drifted so gently, so completely out of reality that the staff did not correct him. They threw him a party instead. Behind a locked door, everyone is finally honest, so let us begin with the people who are only a little strange. 1. The notes began appearing under the door on the very first morning. Small, neat, folded squares of paper, pushed out into the hallway by what the staff slowly realized was a gloved hand. The guest, a young software engineer, polite to the point of physical pain, had decided that the modern hotel room was a biological minefield, and that the only way to survive 5 nights inside one was to never truly touch any part of it. He communicated entirely by note, because the telephone receiver was, in his words, a cultured surface. He had brought his own sealed bedding, his own utensils, and a quantity of disinfectant that would not have looked out of place in a small clinic. He wiped the door handle before and after every use, which raised the obvious question of how, precisely, he managed the after. He requested, by note, that housekeeping not enter, not clean, and ideally not breathe anywhere near his door. By the 3rd day, the staff had stopped finding it alarming and started finding it almost restful. A guest who asked for nothing except to be left, hermetically, alone. He checked out without once shaking a hand, leaving the room cleaner than the day he arrived, and a final note that read simply, "Thank you. I survived." Against a threat that existed nowhere but inside his own mind, he had won decisively. 2. The man with the complaint about the rain was not joking, and he was not nearly finished. He was, in fact, a she, a retired regional administrator accustomed to a lifetime of having her forms taken extremely seriously. And she had arrived for a seaside holiday that the sky had inconsiderately ruined. This, in her firm understanding, was the hotel's fault. The weather was, after all, occurring on the hotel's premises. She requested formal compensation for 3 days of unusable conditions, and when the front desk explained, as delicately as is humanly possible, that the establishment did not control the atmosphere, she received this as a transparent corporate dodge. By the 2nd afternoon, she had drafted a written demand citing the brochure, which had unwisely featured a photograph of a blue sky, as a binding guarantee of advertised weather. She referred to the rain as an ongoing service interruption. She asked, at one memorable point, whether the hotel employed a manager who specifically handled meteorology. She departed, convinced she had been swindled by an institution that could plainly afford better skies, vowing a review that would warn future travelers about the establishment's climate. The rain, supremely indifferent to all of it, carried on for 1 more day after she had gone. 3. Housekeeping first noticed it as a small malfunction. The television in one particular room was always on, always turned to face the wall, always set to the same quiet channel of soft music. They assumed it was broken, or simply forgotten, and switched it off. The next day it was back on, facing the wall again. The guest, an older widower staying a long stretch while visiting family in the area, eventually explained it without the faintest trace of embarrassment. He left the television on, he said, so that the room would not feel empty while he was out. He spoke about the room the way one might speak about a shy house guest, apologizing to it for the noise of the corridor, wishing it good night. He was perfectly lucid about everything else. He simply could not bear the idea of a space sitting alone and silent all day long, and had quietly decided to keep it company. There was nothing to fix and nothing to charge for, and the housekeeper who cleaned that room admitted she had started leaving the television exactly as she found it, facing the wall, playing softly to no one at all. Some kinds of strange, it turns out, are just loneliness wearing a coat. Those guests kept their strangeness private, behind their own locked doors. The next two had decided the entire hotel was their stage, and that the rest of us had quietly bought a ticket. 4. For the better part of a week, a small group of guests gathered in the lobby each morning to follow a tour. It was a genuinely good tour. The guide, a retired schoolteacher with a magnificent voice and an air of total scholarly authority, walked them through the building, pausing at otherwise unremarkable spots to deliver history that left his audience visibly moved. He showed them the corner where, he said, a famous composer had once sat and wept. He indicated a perfectly ordinary staircase, down which, he confided, a scandalous duchess had fled into the night. He spoke of fires survived, of treaties quietly signed, of ghosts who coexisted with the staff politely. The guests took photographs. They asked thoughtful questions. They tipped him at the end. There was only one small difficulty, which the front desk uncovered when a guest came to ask for more detail about the weeping composer. None of it was true. Not one word. The hotel was not nearly old enough to have hosted any of it. The man had been inventing the entire history on the spot every single morning with such warmth and conviction that a dozen strangers believed they were standing somewhere sacred. He was not charging admission. He was not lying for any kind of gain. He simply enjoyed it, the way some men enjoy fishing. When gently asked to stop, he agreed at once, and then, on his final morning, gave one last tour, the best one yet, all about the magnificent hotel that had never existed. 5. One evening, the lobby acquired a podium. The guest had built it himself, out of a luggage cart and a draped bedsheet, and at the appointed hour he took his place behind it, adjusted an invisible microphone, and opened the floor to questions from the assembled press. There was no press. There was a sofa, 2 confused travelers waiting for a taxi, and one night clerk. None of this troubled him in the slightest. He fielded questions that no one had asked, nodding gravely, occasionally raising a calming hand to manage the imaginary clamor. "One at a time, please," he said to the silence. He was here, he announced, to finally address the speculation, and he wished to confirm that the rumors were, in fact, entirely true, though he declined for the moment to specify which rumors, or about whom. "Now I have to ask you something. If you walked into a hotel lobby tonight and found a man holding a press conference for journalists who do not exist, perfectly composed, taking your bewildered stare as a question from the back row, would you have the heart to tell him the room was empty?" Nobody did. He thanked the press for their time, promised a further statement in the morning, and retired with the quiet dignity of a man who had handled a difficult briefing well. The morning statement never came. Some announcements, it seems, are their own reward. A man performing for an empty room is strange, but he still knows, somewhere, that the room is empty. The last few guests had crossed a quieter and far stranger line. They no longer knew which world they were standing in. 6. He arrived dressed for a different era, not in costume, exactly, but in the careful, formal manner of a man who had stepped out of an old photograph and was faintly puzzled by everything that had happened since. The confusion was not an act. He asked the front desk to please connect a call for him through the switchboard. He inquired with great politeness where a gentleman might go to send a telegram. He was baffled and a little wounded by the television, and he treated the elevator as a genuine marvel worth remarking upon each time he used it. He paid in cash, counting it out slowly, and tipped according to some older, more generous arithmetic. The staff never quite established when, in his mind, it was, only that it was firmly, comfortably, and contentedly not now. And here is the thing none of them expected. He was the most gracious guest on the entire floor. He thanked everyone twice. He held every door. He spoke to the housekeeping staff as though their work were a noble and honorable profession, which, he plainly felt, it was. Wherever he was living, it was a more courteous place than the one the rest of us share. And so the staff, without ever discussing it, began gently meeting him there, taking his telegram, connecting his call, and letting a thoroughly old-fashioned man keep his old-fashioned world for a few unhurried days. 7. The requests started small. The guest asked the front desk to please pass a message to the other gentleman staying in my room. A man, he explained patiently, who looked exactly like him, occupied the same room, and kept a maddeningly opposite schedule. There was no other man, there was no second key, no second guest, no one on earth matching the description, except, of course, the guest himself. But he was utterly serene about the whole arrangement. He left notes on the desk for his double, signed in his own hand, full of mild domestic grievances. The double used all the hot water. The double never refilled the kettle. The double, he suspected, snored. He asked the staff to coordinate between the two of them, and to mediate, delicately, a long-running dispute over the better side of the bed. Tell me honestly, would you have corrected him, or would you, like the night clerk, have simply started answering, "I'll be sure to let him know, sir"? The clerk chose kindness over accuracy, and the two halves of one quiet man lived out the week in a fragile, carefully negotiated peace. On checkout, the guest left a final note thanking the staff for their endless patience with both of us, and tipped, thoughtfully, twice. 8. He checked in under an entirely ordinary name, but it became clear within moments that the name was, in his understanding, a disguise. He was traveling incognito, he confided to the front desk, and he would be most grateful if the staff would help maintain his cover, while also somehow observing the appropriate protocol. He expected to be received. He waited with patient and growing disappointment for a security detail that was never going to arrive, and for a degree of ceremony the hotel extended to absolutely no one. He corrected the staff kindly on the proper way to address a person of his standing, and seemed to forgive them their ignorance as a charming provincial failing. The remarkable part, once again, was the grace of it. He was never demanding. A merely self-important man makes threats. This one radiated only the serene certainty of someone who believes the bowing will begin at any moment, and who is far too well-bred to ever insist upon it. The staff, uncertain and quietly charmed, leaned into the smallest courtesies. A right this way, sir. A held door, a murmured wish for a comfortable stay. It cost them nothing whatsoever, and it was, for him, apparently everything. He departed entirely satisfied that his great secret had been faithfully kept by people who had never once known what it was. 9. And so we reach the most unanchored guest ever recorded in this building, and the one the staff still speak about in a softer voice than they use for any of the others. He had checked in only that afternoon. It was, by every record the hotel possessed, his very first time through the doors. But by evening he was moving through the corridors with the slow, fond familiarity of a man arriving at the end of a very long and happy story. He thanked the bellhop warmly for all these years. He told the front desk clerk that no place on earth had ever felt more like home, and that he would miss them all terribly. He spoke of decades, of seasons spent in this exact room, of staff long since retired whom he recalled fondly by name, none of whom had ever existed. He believed, completely and serenely, that he had lived here for most of his life, and that he was now, gently, coming to say goodbye. The staff understood, fairly quickly, that there was nothing here to correct, and nothing they would ever want to. So, they did the only decent thing there was to do. They gathered, quietly, near the desk before he retired for the night, and they thanked him for his years, for his loyalty, for having been such a part of the place. Someone found a small cake. Someone gave a short and genuinely kind speech about a tenure that had never happened. And an old man who was entirely certain he was leaving behind a home he had loved for a lifetime got to feel, for one single evening, profoundly and completely seen. Because behind a locked door, everyone is finally honest, and the honest truth about this guest was that he simply wanted, after a long life, to be remembered. So they remembered him. They had met him that very afternoon. So before anything else, a question, and answer it honestly, down in the comments. What is the strangest, most private thing you have ever done in a hotel room, completely certain the door was locked and no one in the world would ever know? Go on. You are among the unhinged now, because here is the quiet truth sitting underneath all 9 of them. Not a single one of these guests was broken. They had simply stopped pretending, stopped performing the exhausting, lifelong role of a perfectly normal person, the role the rest of us keep up every waking minute out of nothing grander than the fear of being seen. A locked hotel door takes that fear away, and what walks out from behind it is just a human being, at last, honestly themselves. Even the man who tried to file a complaint about the rain, especially him, he was not unreasonable. He simply believed, more sincerely than the rest of us would ever dare, that the world owed him a better sky, and for 3 soggy days he was brave enough to stand at a desk and ask for one. If you would like to keep meeting them, the purists, the performers, and the gloriously, harmlessly lost, then stay with us. The lobby never truly closes, and someone is always checking in to become someone new.